Let's not bring up work tonight, Elise. Mom said, her voice gentle but final. The words landed with the softness of velvet, but the weight of stone. I had flown in from Boston that morning, hopeful ridiculously, so that maybe this time someone would care enough to ask. About the research grant I'd secured. About the publication that got accepted. About anything I had built. But of course, I should have known better. The house hadn't changed. Same copper-toned light fixtures, same soft jazz playing from the kitchen speaker, same faint scent of lemon pledge on the oak floor. And the same arrangement around the table. Sophie in the center, radiant animated, while I was tucked into the corner seat next to the coat rack. Mom's roast beef was perfect as always. Garlic mashed potatoes, brown gravy. The foods of celebration laid out like a feast. But no one raised a glass for me. Dad tapped his wine glass. Everyone a quick toast. To Sophie for becoming regional director. She's the reason we're all here tonight. Applause erupted. I clapped too automatically. Sophie grinned, cheeks flushed, soaking in the glow. Aunt Carol reached across me for the butter and asked how long I was in town. I told her 3 days. Her eyes flicked to her phone. Across the table, one of Sophie's friends, Lexi, I hadn't caught the name, leaned in. Sophie tells us you work in tech biotech, I replied. I'm co-founder of a medtech startup. That's lovely, Mom said quickly, cutting through my sentence like a knife through chiffon. Her smile was warm, performative. But let's not turn this into a resume swap. Tonight is about Sophie. My mouth stayed open a second too long. I closed it. I smiled. I nodded. The next 20 minutes passed in syrupy slow motion. Sophie regaled the group with tales from her office, a botched campaign pitch, a new intern who cried on the first day, a client who sent champagne. Everyone laughed. I drank water. At dessert, they brought out cupcakes shaped like tiny laptops and coffee cups. Sophie's brand was apparently cute workaholic. She looked so pleased. No one noticed I'd stopped eating. Later in the kitchen, I gathered empty plates and loaded the dishwasher. Sophie appeared at the doorway, barefoot, cradling a second glass of wine. She hesitated, then said, I know it's not fair, but tonight was for me. Her voice was soft. Guilty, maybe. Or maybe just tired of pretending it wasn't always like this. I didn't respond right away. I rinsed off gravy from one of the plates, then finally said, I know. And I did. I knew it in the bone-deep way a person knows when a door has been locked from the inside and you've stopped trying to knock. Upstairs, I pulled my suitcase toward the old twin bed. The posters from my high school debate team still hung on the wall, curling at the edges. My laptop blinked open automatically. I tapped through the usual junk mail and newsletters. Then I saw it. Keynote invitation. Women in STEM Global Conference Geneva. It had been sitting in my inbox for 12 hours. I'd left it unread, unsure if I was allowed to believe I belonged in a room like that. But now I wasn't asking for permission. I clicked the link. I didn't need their approval. I just needed to answer to myself. They never erased me. They just looked past me again and again. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast and brewed coffee, a scent so deeply tied to childhood that for a moment I forgot where I was, or rather, where I wasn't meant to belong. The sun was slanting through the half-closed blinds, catching the flecks of dust that danced lazily over the countertops. I sat in the same chair I used to do homework in, hands wrapped around a mug that was too hot and far too quiet. Sophie breezed in, phone in hand, chatting loudly with someone named Darren about ski rentals. Aspen might be tight unless we leave before the 22nd, she said, dropping her purse onto the kitchen island as if the place still belonged to her. Mom was already bustling around, opening the fridge, making a list of ingredients she needed for Thanksgiving. Dad chuckled at something in the newspaper, asking no one in particular if they remembered their ill-fated road trip to Charleston that never quite happened. No one asked about my return flight, or Boston, or the stem cell grant we had just gotten national press for. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the silence settle around me like a second skin. At around 9, Jessie appeared, one of Sophie's college friends, still sharp from last night's drinks, but carrying herself like someone who'd never once had to raise her voice to be heard. God remember junior year. She laughed, hanging her coat with a toss that knocked over one of Mom's ceramic vases. Sophie, you slayed with that proposal, the one about behavioral metrics and user empathy. You were unstoppable. The air in the room shifted. I remembered it well. I'd written that first draft, penciled it out on the back of a napkin, then spent a weekend building the structure, explaining the neuroscience references, tying it all to user experience models. Sophie had been sick, too foggy to think straight, and I had stepped in thinking I was being a good sister. She submitted it, won the grant, got featured in the campus newsletter. I got a lukewarm "thanks again" text with no punctuation. Sophie glanced up, smile tight. Yeah, that semester was a blur. Jessie narrowed her eyes, then looked at me. Wait, wasn't that your project originally? My spoon tapped once against the rim of the mug. I gave a small shrug. It was a long time ago. Jessie looked like she wanted to say more, but Mom chimed in from the stove. Sophie's always been so driven. She knows how to seize opportunity. The words weren't malicious. They were worse, casual. Honest, even. I swallowed back the retort rising in my throat. My coffee had gone cold. I stayed at the table until the conversation shifted to Christmas flights and who would host New Year's Eve. No one noticed when I stood and slipped away. Upstairs, I pushed open the door to my old bedroom. The bed was still there, same faded duvet cover, but the walls were bare now. My debate ribbons gone. The college acceptance letters I once taped to the closet, erased like chalk from a board. I knelt down and pulled out the storage bin I knew Mom hadn't touched. The lid creaked slightly. Inside were spiral-bound notebooks, a cracked TI-84, and a manila folder labeled in my handwriting, Behavioral Metrics. Draft 1. It wasn't a copy. It was the original. I flipped through the pages, skimming the diagrams I'd drawn, the citations I'd spent hours compiling, my notes, my outline, my words. I knew the edges of every margin. Sophie hadn't changed a thing. She'd just written her name on the front page. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve. I closed the folder, slid it into the side of my suitcase between my laptop and a pair of heels I wouldn't wear. I didn't say anything to Sophie, but I brought the original copy back to Boston. They praised Sophie's drive. Meanwhile, my inbox held an invitation worth a national stage. The first Monday of November came with a wind sharp enough to sting. I stood in front of the lab's glass doors for a full 10 seconds, letting the air bite my skin, hoping it would help shake off the residue of last weekend. It didn't. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, the smell of ethanol and stale coffee filling the air. My lab coat still hung exactly where I'd left it, on the back of my chair, half folded, like I'd planned to return sooner. I hadn't told anyone why I went home. No one had asked. Erin looked up from her microscope when I entered. You're late. Delayed flight. Turbulence, I replied, tossing my bag down. She cocked her head, noticing the shift. You okay? I hesitated, then gave a smile so thin it could snap. Fine. We worked in near silence for the next hour, the quiet only broken by the hum of machines and the soft tapping of keyboards. I cataloged some new samples, annotated a few sequences, and tried to pretend that the memories of my parents' dining room didn't still scrape against the inside of my chest. At lunch, Erin slid into the chair across from me with a hummus wrap and a look. You're not fine? Spill. I sighed, peeling the label off my water bottle. It was Sophie's promotion party. Everyone was there. Friends, family. They talked about her job, her ambition, her Aspen plans. No one asked about Boston, or our patent filing, or even if I was seeing anyone. They just skipped me, like I wasn't even furniture, at least gets dusted once in a while. Erin blinked. You flew across the country to be ignored. Tradition, I said dryly. She chewed slowly, then pointed her wrap at me like a sword. Let them have their illusions. You've got real work. You don't need their approval to validate what you already are. I didn't answer. Not out loud. But something loosened in my chest. Back at my desk, I refreshed my inbox out of habit. Among the peer review notices and sample logs, one subject line caught my eye. Subject invitation to contribute. Women in STEM series from Dr. Vanessa Blake. My heart stuttered. Dr. Blake was a legend in the biomedical world, founder of the Sloan Initiative, Harvard alum, frequent Forbes contributor. She'd spoken at MIT 3 times, and every time she did, the room stood still. I clicked it. Elise, I've been following your work on the Tissue Regeneration Project. Your recent data sets were cited in the NIH Roundtable last month. I'm curating a series for Forbes on women shaping the future of science. Would you be interested in contributing a short essay, more than 200 words or so, on your path, your voice, and the intersection of silence and innovation? Best, Vanessa. I sat there staring at the screen, her words glowing against the sterile white background. My fingers trembled just slightly as I opened a blank document. Silence and innovation, I murmured. The phrase settled into me like truth. Maybe I didn't need to shout. Maybe building in silence was louder than applause. That night, I stayed at the lab late typing long after the lights in the hallway shut off. The hum of the freezer units kept me company as I wrote. Not a manifesto, not a grievance list, just a story. My story. I wrote about coding DNA before I could legally drink, about getting published before my first boyfriend, about the project Sophie used, and the folder I took back without a word. But I never mentioned names. I didn't need to. The story wasn't about them. When I finished, I read it over once. Then again, I changed the title to something that made my throat catch. Speaking Through Silence, Building Beyond Recognition. I stared at the send button for a full minute. Then I clicked it. I didn't say anything to anyone. Not my parents, not Sophie, not even Aaron. I pressed send and didn't tell a soul. Sophie went viral for a quote she borrowed from a journal I once kept. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversations and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. I liked mornings here, early, muted, detached from obligation. It was a small place tucked near the science building, frequented by overworked grad students and professors on their third cup. My usual seat by the window let in the gold-tinged light of late autumn. I pulled out my tablet, ready to check lab protocols. A notification banner slid across the screen. From Aaron, check Sophie's latest post. You're going to scream! I raised an eyebrow. It wasn't unusual for Aaron to send me things Sophie had shared. She had a dark sense of humor about it, found it bizarre, even entertaining how my family simultaneously ignored and echoed me. I opened LinkedIn and immediately saw it. Sophie was center stage, quite literally, behind a podium at the Midwest Women in Marketing Summit. She looked polished, self-assured. The photo was filtered to warm tones, her caption short but impactful. Leadership is not a volume, but an echo. I felt my spine go rigid. No citation. No quotation marks. Just the sentence. My sentence. Underneath, so well said. This quote hits deep. You're on fire. Sophie heart emojis, clapping hands, networking invites all rolling in under my name. Only it wasn't my name anymore. It was hers. That line came from a journal I'd filled during my junior year of high school. I remember writing it after staying silent during a group project, only to watch someone else echo my ideas and get credit. It was a survival mantra, a reminder that impact wasn't always loud. She had borrowed that journal once. I remembered it now. She was doing a project on women in leadership and said she needed inspiration. She never returned it. I'd forgotten, or maybe I'd let myself forget. Aaron's message buzzed next. Aaron! She seriously posted that your quote. Before I could respond, another notification arrived. Vanessa. Vanessa Blake. I recognized that line. That's yours, isn't it? I stared at the text for a moment. Vanessa had only known me for 6 months, but somehow she understood more than my own mother did. Me, it was. Once. Vanessa. Your Forbes piece just got final approval. They'll run it January 20th, same night as the Summit Gala. Ready to make some echoes of your own January 20th. Of course. The Summit Gala. Sophie's crowning night. She had been rehearsing her speech since summer. I minimized the message and sat back. The hum of conversation in the cafe faded into static. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the teal-covered journal I'd kept hidden in the deepest pocket. Its edges were curled, the spine loose. I hadn't looked at it in years. I turned to the quote. Page 47. Written in blue ink, a little tilted to the right. I ran my fingers over the words. Then slowly, I tore the page from the spine. It came loose, easier than I expected. I folded it once, twice, then again, until it was no bigger than a business card. I held it in my palm for a while, feeling its corners press into my skin like a soft brand. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I wasn't surprised either. But there was a tightness in my chest that hadn't been there before. The kind that tells you something isn't just wrong, it's finished. I looked around the cafe, sunlight catching dust motes as they drifted through the air. Across from me, two students debated something in hushed tones over open laptops. A woman fed bits of croissant to her toddler, wiping his mouth with the gentlest touch. Their lives for a moment seemed so far from mine. I wondered what it would be like to be seen without earning it to be noticed, just for existing, not for proving. That quote wasn't the only thing Sophie had taken over the years. She had absorbed pieces of me, phrases, ideas, even mannerisms, and worn them like her own. It wasn't malicious. That was the worst part. She probably didn't even remember where the words came from. But I did. I remembered all of it. I wasn't going to post about it. I wasn't going to fight for credit in a comment section. I had something bigger now. Something she couldn't plagiarize my voice on my terms in my own name. I reached for my coffee again, and as the warmth hit my fingertips, I felt it. Not anger, not revenge. Resolve. Quiet, steady resolve. I opened my inbox. The RSVP from Forbes sat there unopened. The button blinked, confirm attendance. I clicked it. I didn't say a word to my family. I gave her that quote, that stage, that silence. But not anymore. The wind pressed against the lab windows like it wanted to come inside. Snowflakes spiraled under the streetlights, painting everything in a soft white glow. I sat alone at my workstation, the rest of the team long gone for the weekend. The only sounds were the soft hum of the centrifuge and the distant hiss of the heating vents. I liked it this way, quiet, clean, without the need to explain. On my desk sat the cream-colored envelope, heavy and elegant, marked with the gold foil seal of Forbes. I had received the official invitation earlier that morning. Gala night, January 20th, 6:30 p.m., Grand Ballroom, New York City. I turned it over, letting the weight of it settle in my palm. I hadn't told my parents. I hadn't even told Sophie. Erin popped her head in a mug of chamomile tea in her hand, and that unmistakable look of mischief in her eyes. "Don't pretend you're not going to stun the room," she said, grinning. "Have you picked a dress yet, or are you going full black turtleneck tech goddess?" I smiled. "It's not that kind of event." "You're being honored, Elise," she said, dropping into the chair opposite me. "You should let them see you." "The real you." She hesitated, then asked gently, "You ever think of inviting Sophie?" I didn't answer at first. I looked down at the invitation again, then across the room to the bookshelf where I kept my old research notes and journals. "No," I said finally. "She's already had her stage." Erin didn't press further. She understood in the way close friends do, without needing the whole explanation. Later that night, after she'd gone, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. I stared at it for a long moment before pressing play. It was my mother. "Hi, sweetheart. Just checking in. Sophie mentioned something about you being in New York this weekend. If you're there for work, maybe you two can meet for coffee or something. Anyway, stay warm. Love you." No mention of the article. No mention of the invitation. Just a passing note like she'd glanced at the weather and remembered I existed. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. It wasn't anger that came. It was exhaustion. Exhaustion from years of being optional. I walked over to the shelf and pulled out the Teal journal. The quote was gone, ripped out a week ago, but I hadn't touched the rest since. I flipped to the back. The last page was half filled. The ink faded, but familiar. I tore it out carefully, then folded it twice. I opened a drawer, pulled out a blank envelope, and slipped the page inside. I added a small note in my neatest handwriting. "This was yours once," but it always came from me. No return address, no signature. Just a gesture, a quiet one, but not silent. I sealed the envelope and placed it at the front of my bag. I'd drop it off at the post office before my flight. The next morning, I checked into my flight. Window seat. Early boarding. I packed light, just one black dress, my notes, and the certainty that this time I wasn't showing up for permission. I was showing up because I had something to say. Before heading to bed that night, I sat down at the corner table in my apartment, turned on the desk lamp, and opened my laptop. I reread the article scheduled for publication, Speaking Through Silence Building Beyond Recognition. The byline still made my chest tighten. For years, I'd believed that recognition had to come from others. But the truth was, it had to begin with me. I scrolled through Sophie's latest posts. Another snapshot with colleagues, another quote with suspicious familiarity. I used to feel a pang envy, maybe. Now, it felt more like a release. Let her keep the spotlight she borrowed. I had earned the foundation under my feet. My coat hung ready by the door. It still smelled faintly of the lab's sterile, focused safe. I reached into the inner pocket and slipped the sealed envelope beside my boarding pass. Let the gala be hers in memory. This one would be mine in truth. I sent it to the house just before I boarded my flight to New York. They asked me not to speak, so I stood where no words were needed. I stepped through the grand entrance of the ballroom, the kind with ceilings so high they made you feel like breathing too loudly might crack the chandeliers. The carpet under my heels was plush, wine-colored, hushed, like theater curtains just before they rise. My name wasn't on any family lips that night. No one clapped for me because they loved me. They clapped because I had earned it. I scanned the room. Dozens of women shimmered in gowns and satin jumpsuits, laughing in soft clusters. I didn't know any of them. Not in the way that comforted. Not the way Sophie knew a room. But I wasn't here to be known. I was here because someone saw something I wrote and decided it belonged in the light. Vanessa waved me over with a warm smile. She wore midnight blue with a pin that shimmered like a constellation. "You look like a woman about to be recognized," she said, handing me a flute of sparkling water. I smiled, not quite steady. "And you look like someone who knew this was coming." "Because I did," she said, looping her arm through mine. "This is the part you don't control, Elise. Let it unfold." We stood near the back, close to the velvet rope that framed the stage. A photographer brushed past, offering a half nod. I noticed the cameras weren't pointed at me yet. I was still anonymous, still drifting just beneath the surface. The MC took the stage. Her voice rang out crisp and warm. "Tonight, we celebrate innovation." 10 stories were selected from hundreds. One stood out not for its noise, but for its quiet insistence that work, real work, speaks for itself. I felt Vanessa's hand tighten around mine. Speaking Through Silence by Dr. Elise Walker. The lights shifted. My name appeared 20 feet wide on a screen made for magnifying truth. There was no applause from my mother, no proud nod from my father. Sophie wasn't snapping a picture from the front row, but someone in the audience gasped just slightly. Someone else clapped a beat too long. I stepped onto the stage, hands calm at my sides. The award was glass, simple, clean, angular. I didn't say anything. That was the whole point. Off stage, a reporter approached. "Dr. Walker," she said, "is your family here tonight?" I paused, not to think, just to let the question settle like dust. I smiled, not sarcastic, not bitter, just enough to make space for whatever the world assumed. "No," I said, "but I'm exactly where I need to be." We moved through the rest of the night like silk through fingers. Vanessa introduced me to colleagues, editors, even a board member from a biotech foundation. I shook hands. I answered questions. I didn't shrink. At one point, someone pulled out their phone to show me that my article was trending on LinkedIn. "People are quoting you," she said, especially that bit about building beyond recognition. I thought of Sophie then, not in anger, but with a distant clarity, like recalling a name from a dream. She'd spent years building platforms out of borrowed bricks, and tonight the ground was shifting. As the gala wound down, I retrieved my coat. The ballroom doors opened onto a wintry New York night. The air bit at my collarbones, sharp and clean. Vanessa slipped a hand on my shoulder. "Tonight," she said softly, "they'll hear about it from someone else." I nodded. "I hope they do." My phone buzzed as I stepped into the cab. One notification, one name, nice speech. I didn't know you were even invited. I stared at it a moment. Then I hit mute on the thread and looked out the window, letting the lights of Manhattan blur into motion. Sophie texted. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. The message came in around 8:47 a.m., just as I was reviewing the latest trial data on a new compound for autoimmune repair. It was short, just 2 words, well played. No punctuation, no warmth, and no follow-up. I stared at it for a beat too long, not out of surprise, but out of the surreal repetition of it all, her reaching out just a second too late and always in the tone of competition rather than connection. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The sun outside my office window hadn't yet burned through the frost on the glass, but inside Novacin, the air was sharp with focus. Erin sat across from me, curled around her coffee mug like it was armor. Her laptop was open to the editorial review schedule. She didn't need to ask what the buzz was about Forbes had tagged us again this time in a thread featuring women under 40 shaping the future of biotech. They want childhood photos, she said, scrolling. For what spotlight series? You're being profiled next month. They want the from little girl to disruptor narrative. I leaned back. Childhood photos. My jaw tightened before I could help it. I knew what they'd find if I bothered looking albums curated by my mother page after page of Sophie's dance recitals, spelling B trophies family trips with Sophie in the center and me somewhere at the edge either blinking or cropped. There's nothing I'd send, I said finally. Erin tilted her head. None at all. There's one. I pushed back from my desk and crossed the room to the cabinet, where I kept a small box labeled Personal. Elise W. Inside were mostly things I never unpacked, old name badges, scribbled research notes, and one envelope marked in my mother's handwriting, Summer, 2003. I pulled out the photo. It was from a cousin's birthday party. Sophie was in the foreground, smiling with frosting on her nose, clearly staged for the camera. I was behind her mid-step, reaching to clean something from the table. My face was blurry, half-turned. The caption might as well have read there, but not central. I scanned the image, attached it to the reply email, wrote one sentence as the caption, the background was always mine. When I hit send, it wasn't out of bitterness, it was context. Later that afternoon, as I reviewed the investor briefings, a new application hit the screen standard form requesting a partnership grant. The name caught me. Walker Foundation. I froze. My eyes swept to the listed contacts Linda Walker, Sophie Walker. Mission statement, supporting women in marketing and innovation. There was no mention of Novacin, no reference to STEM, no trace of me. Did you know about this? I asked Erin, spinning my laptop around. She leaned in, squinting. Is that your mom's new foundation? I nodded slowly. Apparently, though I wasn't invited to the launch. Erin clicked through. Their first fundraiser was last month. Looks like Sophie gave the keynote. Of course she did. I leaned back again, exhaling slowly. It didn't hurt, not the way it would have a year ago. What I felt instead was clarity, sharp as winter air. They had built something without me. Again. But this time, I had built something else. Something they couldn't overwrite. An email from Vanessa pinged just then. Subject, reader, response. Thought you'd appreciate this body. Your article made me cry. I always thought staying quiet meant losing. You helped me see it can mean building. Thank you. I smiled, letting the words sink in. There was a kind of victory in that. Not one that required headlines or applause, but one that echoed through the silence I had chosen. As the day closed, I tidied my desk and opened the investor review folder again. My eyes hovered on the Walker Foundation entry, but instead of deleting it or flagging it, I added a note monitored. No action. Because silence, I was learning, didn't mean surrender. It meant choosing what deserved response and what no longer did. And sometimes the truest power came from not speaking at all. I closed the laptop and turned toward the dark window, my reflection now sharp against the glass. Tomorrow, we would begin our second trial phase. But tonight I was done replying to ghosts. I opened the grant list, saw the name of a new organization applying Walker Foundation. They used the family name, but left out the one who built the legacy. 3 years ago, I sat at this same desk, sliding a proposal across the table toward my mother. A STEM scholarship initiative specifically for girls in underserved communities. Her eyes scanned it once, and she said, "Sounds like something Sophie would do." I let the remark slide back, then chalked it up to a bad day or an offhand comment. But this morning, the past wrapped itself neatly in a YouTube thumbnail shared by Erin over Slack. "You need to see this," she'd written. No emoji. No buffer. Just the link. I clicked. The video began with a piano score, warm, soft, unmistakably curated. A drone shot of the Walker home glided across the screen before cutting to the living room fireplace. Sophie stood beside our mother, both poised as if cast in a commercial. The text beneath them read the Walker Initiative for Women in Tech. My jaw tightened. "We're proud to launch this foundation to support the next generation of women innovators." Sophie said, her voice practiced, her expression radiant. Growing up in a house full of curiosity, it was always clear that possibility lived right here. Mom nodded solemnly beside her. No mention of me. Not in the backstory, not in the inspiration, not in the call to action. The scholarship design was nearly identical to mine. Same 3-phase application process, same emphasis on mentorship, even the same age bracket. I scanned the video's description. The words were eerily familiar. It was as if someone had lifted my outline and given it a makeover in pastel tones and corporate speak. I didn't speak. I just stared at the screen. Erin peeked around my office door a few minutes later, coffee in one hand, an uncertain look in the other. "You saw it," I nodded. "They didn't even change the title much," she said, setting the cup beside me. "You called it the Walker Fellowship. This is the Walker Initiative." "Creative?" I tried to laugh. I couldn't. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. "I'm going to finish prepping for DC," I said. "That's what I'm going to do." There was a time when something like this would have broken me, or worse, sent me scrambling to be heard to correct the record to justify why I mattered. But not now. Not after everything. I was tired of making noise for people who only heard themselves. A call came through mid-afternoon. Unknown number, New York area code. I answered anyway. "Ms. Walker, this is Leah Cho with Beacon Magazine. I was wondering if you were involved in the Walker Initiative project recently announced by your family." I paused. "No," I said, "but I think I inspired it." Quietly. There was a pause on her end. "Would you be open to discussing that further? I think the gala speech speaks for itself." I replied, more calm than I expected. "But thank you for asking." I hung up and sat back in my chair. Erin stood in the doorway, again, arms crossed. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm not hurt," I said. "I'm done." She raised a brow. "I don't need them to name me anymore," I added. "I know who I am." She leaned against the doorframe. "I know who you are too. And the people in DC. They're about to find out." Later that evening, I turned my attention to the upcoming Women's Day event. The keynote coordinator had asked if I'd like to use slides or a short clip. I opted for the latter. The video would open with a still image, black and white, of a girl in a school lab, half shadowed by someone in front. The caption beneath would read, "The background was always mine." It wasn't meant to be bitter. It was just the truth. And for once, I didn't need it to be anything else. I accepted an invitation to speak at the International Women's Day event in Washington, D.C. They had a foundation. I had footage they never knew existed. The rain hit my apartment windows like quiet reminders. Outside, the early March sky hung low and gray, mirroring the heaviness I'd been carrying since the gala. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, surrounded by a fortress of half-labeled hard drives, notebooks with frayed spines and post-it notes curling at the edges. Somewhere in this chaos, the past waited. "Okay," I whispered to no one. "Let's find it." Erin had offered to help, but I declined. This part, I had to do alone. It was a decision born not out of pride, but necessity. The only way to reclaim what was mine was to prove I had always held it. 3 hours passed. I'd nearly given up when I opened an unlabeled USB tucked between 2 graduate textbooks and plugged it in. The folder popped open. Dorm cam. 2007. My pulse skipped. Inside a list of AVI files, gritty, time-stamped, like relics. I clicked one at random. Is this thing recording Sophie's voice? Younger? Brighter? Her face filled the frame in a dorm room I hadn't stepped into in over a decade. Okay, so Elise basically runs my science fair ideas. I just smile and present. She laughed at the end. A little too proud. I remembered that laugh now, not because of its sweetness, but because it had echoed at my expense. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply leaned back, watched the clip twice more, then dragged it into a new folder labeled DC Keynote March. That night, Vanessa called over Zoom. Her hair was swept back a glass of tea beside her laptop. You found something, she said. Not a question. I did, I replied. Her brow furrowed. Something powerful. I shared my screen and hit play. She watched in silence, blinking slowly, lips pressed tight. When the clip ended, she looked at me through the camera as if searching for hesitation. It'll hit hard, she said. Are you ready for that kind of exposure? I leaned closer. It's not revenge. It's recall. The next morning, I added the clip to my keynote slides. I didn't announce it. I didn't watermark it. I just made it part of the narrative part of my truth. I titled the section Invisible Input. I recorded the full talk twice, timing every slide, every pause. Erin helped me tweak transitions. She never asked where the clip came from. She knew better than to pry when the lines ran deep. Still, the silence between us held weight. You okay? She finally asked as we shut our laptops around midnight. I thought about the question. Okay wasn't quite right, but I was aligned. For the first time in years, my inside matched what I was willing to show. I'm done asking for recognition, I said. Now I just present the receipts. The phrase made Erin smirk. That's the most badass thing you've ever said. I laughed, surprised by the sound of it, light even amused. On the morning of March 6th, I woke early. The city was still asleep, but my inbox was already alive. Vanessa had finalized my time slot. I would speak third, before a Nobel Prize winner, after the director of NIH. I dressed in silence, choosing a gray blazer with a subtle pinstripe and a navy blouse. I slid the USB into my bag, checked the file twice. Before leaving, I took one last glance at the clip. Sophie's voice, her offhand confession. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. I opened the email draft to the event organizer, attached the final version of the presentation, and typed a short line. Please confirm receipt. Then, with one breath in and none out, I hit send. There was no dramatic flourish, no last-minute hesitation, only the click of the mouse, the hum of my laptop, and the knowledge that this time I wouldn't be erased. Not by accident, not by design, not again. I zipped up my bag, slipped into my coat, and opened the door to a sharp wind that tasted like spring trying to crawl through winter's last breath. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. It was silent most of the week. But now, one new message. Sophie. I didn't check it. I just stepped into the cab, watching the streetlights blur into lines of amber and frost. My truth was already en route, and it didn't need her permission to land. They asked me not to talk about work, so I spoke into a microphone, and the room listened. The stage lights were warmer than I expected, soft gold that spilled across the polished wood like dawn breaking through certainty. 500 faces stared back, but I didn't feel exposed. I felt balanced, grounded, maybe for the first time. The podium bore the seal of the Women in Leadership Conference. March 8th, Washington, D.C. The banner behind me read Women Reclaiming Credit. I wasn't supposed to talk about this. I began adjusting the mic slightly. That was the rule, spoken and unspoken. I let the silence stretch, not awkward but firm, like a boundary finally named. In my family, I continued. We celebrated birthdays with big gestures, but accomplishments were selectively noticed. My younger sister made headlines once for a pitch deck. It was clean, simple, compelling. I know because I wrote it. A ripple of murmurs stirred in the back rows. I didn't flinch. I didn't tell her I remembered. I didn't bring it up at dinner. I figured maybe that's what older sisters did. Build the staircase so someone else could stand taller. The screen behind me lit up first with a photo of a faded science fair booth. Then a paused video frame. Vanessa had warned me it would hit hard. I took a breath, then tapped the remote. The clip played Sophie, 17, laughing into a dorm room camera. Elise basically runs my science fair ideas. I just smile and present. It wasn't malicious, just casual. The kind of casual that breaks things slowly. The room was still. No coughs, no shifting chairs. Just the sound of a truth landing. When the clip faded, I stepped slightly forward. I didn't show that to shame anyone. I said, my voice lower now. I show it because history has a habit of forgetting the quiet ones. I scanned the room briefly. Third row, left side. Aaron nodded, once eyes glassy but steady. I spent years letting results speak for me, hoping that data publications progress would make someone turn around and say, we see you. But silence only works when someone's listening. I swallowed. So here I am. Not loud, not angry, just done with silence. Applause started slowly tentative, almost afraid to interrupt. Then it built row by row, ripple by ripple, until the room became a wave of rising affirmation. I blinked once. Didn't bow. Just breathed. I let my results speak until they needed my voice too. The screen faded to black. The lights dimmed. I walked off stage, heels quiet against the wood, and the air behind me buzzing, not with applause anymore, but with realization. Backstage, Vanessa met me with a simple nod. You did what you came to do. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Not because I was upset, but because something inside had shifted too far to ever return. We walked toward the green room, passing murmurs, pats on the shoulder, flashes from press cameras. My phone vibrated in my bag. I ignored it. Only once I sat down, coat draped over my knees, did I check the screen. One new email. Subject line: we need to talk. Sender: Sophie Walker. They always saved me a seat, but never a voice. I stood on the front steps of my parents' house again, the same slate gray door, the same hydrangeas trimmed back for the season. Nothing had changed, and maybe that was the problem. My coat collar was still dusted with flakes of sleet. I should have shaken them off, but I liked the cold. It reminded me I could still feel something. Mom had called it a casual dinner, just us, a few close relatives, and Sophie. No real explanation. Just an invitation sent the day after Sophie's email. We need to talk. I rang the bell. A beat passed. Then two. Richard opened the door. Smile practiced. Elise. You made it. Come in, come in. Inside the house was warm but sterile. The dining room was lit with dim amber bulbs, a row of candles flickering down the center of the long walnut table. Silverware gleamed beside porcelain dishes. A bottle of red breathed by the sideboard. Sophie stood by the fireplace, glass in hand. Her expression was neutral, maybe too neutral. Hey, she said. I nodded. Hi. We sat after the pleasantries died. Mom smoothed her linen napkin into her lap, trying too hard to appear effortless. She asked about the weather in D.C., avoided any mention of the conference. Dad asked about the biotech market, safe ground, as always. No one mentioned the article. Or the video. I watched the dance of polite nothingness and kept my mouth closed. Halfway through the roasted duck and wilted green, Sophie cleared her throat. So, the clip, she said. Her voice was even, but her fork hovered mid-air. Why that one? All eyes turned toward me. I set my fork down. Because it was real, I said. And because it said more in 10 seconds than I ever could with 1,000 polite silences. Linda's jaw tightened. The press twisted things, Elise. You know how they are. I didn't talk to the press, I said. I didn't even name anyone. The story spoke for itself. Dad murmured something about public perception, but I barely heard him. I was watching Sophie. She looked not defensive, but frayed. tired. You made your point, she said quietly. I just wish you'd said something sooner. To me, privately, I exhaled, measured. I did. So many times. I just didn't use a microphone. No one spoke. A clock ticked in the hallway, absurdly loud. I wrote those ideas, I continued. Built them. I pitched that scholarship concept 3 years ago and got told it sounded like something you would do. Linda flinched. I didn't mean it that way, but it landed that way. More silence. Then Sophie said it just above a whisper. You deserve better. I know that. My hands twitched in my lap, wanting to reach for something tea-wine the truth. And yet, I said gently, no one asked me how I felt. Not once. Not about the quote or the science fairs or the family photos that always had one person conveniently off-center. I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped the hardwood floor. I appreciate the dinner, I said. Really? But I didn't come for reconciliation. I came because I was curious. Richard rose, unsure whether to follow me or stay seated. You're still part of this family, he said softly. I looked down at the place, setting my name handwritten on a place card in cursive ink. Then I saw it beside my plate tucked against the candle holder, a family photo. Recent, framed in silver. Taken, I assumed, during the shoot for the Walker Foundation. Sophie Center, Mom and Dad on either side. Even a few cousins smiling in the background. I wasn't in it. I reached for my coat. You saved me a seat, I said. But you never really made space. I left the photo where it was and walked out into the cold. You can rewrite stories, but you can't erase a name that built itself. I stood at the edge of the stage at MIT's Baxter Auditorium fingertips, resting lightly on the podium heart. Steady in a way it hadn't been in months. The light was warm golden, even catching the copper threads in my blazer. Rows of students leaned forward, notebooks, open eyes wide with possibility. This was not a night for reconciliation. This was a night for declaration. 2 days earlier, Sophie had sent an email, formal, almost cold beneath its friendliness. She proposed I join her and Mom as co-director of the Walker Foundation. A shared legacy, she called it. The subject line read, "Let's do this together." I hadn't replied right away. I had simply forwarded the message to Vanessa, who replied in less than 5 words. It's too late for shared credits. And I agreed. Fully. Quietly. Irrevocably. The microphone hummed as I leaned in. Good evening, I began. It's an honor to return to this campus not as a student, not as a mentee, but as someone with a responsibility. Tonight, I'm proud to introduce a project that's been in the making for a very long time. A few rows back, I spotted Dr. Caldwell nodding. She had taken a chance on me once, before my startup had patents, before our trials passed phase 2. She believed in the scaffolding I was still building. The Elise Walker Fellowship for Women in Synthetic Biology. I continued pausing as the title illuminated the screen behind me, will support the next generation of female innovators. Not with speeches, not with borrowed slogans, but with capital mentorship and authorship. I scanned the crowd. No family. No Sophie. The silence, though, didn't hurt anymore. It felt earned. The first endowment is funded by Novasyn Biotech and matched by 3 private contributors who, like me, once worked quietly in the corners of big labs. Invisible hands, silent breakthroughs. A soft murmur rippled through the room. Vanessa gave me a subtle nod from stage left. I clicked to the next slide. On screen, a photograph of my old research notebook filled the space. The corners were frayed, the ink slightly smudged but still legible. At the top right corner of the page was my childhood handwriting, sharp, overly precise, the kind that tried too hard to be taken seriously. Property of Elise Walker, 2003. A pause. Then applause. I let it land before I spoke again. This, I said, is the first record of my ideas. I was 10. No one told me they were valuable, so I kept them to myself. Tonight, I offer them to you. Another round of applause, louder this time. Some students were already typing on their phones, sharing no doubt the name, the fellowship, the message. During the Q&A, a young woman in the second row raised her hand. Her eyes shimmered with something like awe. How did you stay quiet for so long? She asked. I smiled gently. Because I was listening, I said. And now I'm ready to write back. The moment landed harder than I expected. There was something final in saying it aloud. Like I just closed a chapter I didn't even know was still open. Afterward, I moved through the crowd handshakes, thank yous, a few interview requests. Vanessa intercepted a reporter trying to corner me about the Walker Foundation. She's here for her work, Vanessa said firmly. Tonight isn't about the past. But of course, the past always finds a way in. I stepped outside into the March air, crisp and tinged with early thaw. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, thumb, hesitating, before I tapped into the notification. It was from a news outlet I recognized, The Atlantic. Headline already previewed in the subject line, What I Owe My Sister by Sophie Walker. Some apologies are spoken. Others are framed in silence. The late afternoon sun pooled across my kitchen table, casting golden streaks over unopened mail and a half-empty cup of green tea. I hadn't expected anything. Most packages were research samples or newsletters I hadn't unsubscribed from yet. But this one was different, small, rectangular, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. I stared at it for a few seconds longer than necessary. My name was written in careful, slanted print, too deliberate to be from a courier, too familiar not to stir something deep in my chest. I slid a knife under the tape and peeled it open. Inside, nestled between folds of navy blue tissue, was a wooden frame. Not just any frame, mahogany, smooth edges, clearly custom. And within it, under glare-resistant glass, sat something I hadn't seen in years. My old notebook. The soft blue cover had faded slightly, but the inked letters on the front, E+ES Future Ideas, were still legible. A small brass plaque had been screwed into the bottom of the frame. I leaned in to read it. I wasn't ready. Now I understand. I sat back slowly, breath caught between memory and surprise. That notebook was from when I was 16. I'd filled it with sketches, plans, prototypes, ideas I believed Sophie and I might build together. Back then, I thought collaboration came naturally to sisters. I didn't yet understand what silence could cost. She never brought it up again after that summer. I assumed it was forgotten, or worse, dismissed. I never asked. Now it stood in front of me, not returned, but revered. Erin arrived not long after, carrying a laptop and a tote bag full of protein bars. "Hope you don't mind me barging in," she said, stopping mid-step. "Whoa! What's that?" I turned the frame so she could see it. Erin walked over and crouched down slightly, her eyes scanning the title, the handwriting, the plaque. She sent this. There's no note, just the frame, just that line. Erin didn't speak for a moment. "Well, damn. That's not nothing." I nodded. I hadn't cried. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like something had closed and opened at the same time. "She must have kept it all this time," I said, even when she never said a word. "Maybe she didn't know what to say," Erin replied, settling onto the couch. "Until now." I placed the frame on the top shelf of my home office, above the degrees, above the published articles, even above the plaque from Forbes. It wasn't more important than those things, but it had taken longer to arrive. The rest of the day passed in quiet emails and half-hearted editing. My mind stayed with the frame, the plaque, the years I spent wondering if she ever looked back. I stared at my phone for 15 minutes before calling. She picked up after one ring. "Hi," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. There was a beat of silence. "Hi. I got it. I'm glad. I just wanted to say thank you. No need to explain anything. I understand." Another pause, then a soft exhale. "That means more than I can say." "I think that's the point," I said with a gentle smile. We didn't talk long. No awkward jokes or nostalgia, just the rhythm of two people acknowledging something unspoken for too long. As we were about to hang up, Sophie added, "I hope you'll open the next letter too." I sent it to MIT. The line clicked off before I could ask what she meant. Every year they asked, "Are you coming home for Easter?" This year they didn't. I noticed it on a Wednesday, midway through checking lab schedules and sorting out protein batch anomalies. No missed calls, No calendar invite from mom. Not even one of those passive-aggressive group messages with pastel bunny emojis and a subject line like family brunch. Let's coordinate. Just silence. I stared at my screen a second longer than necessary. The cursor blinked beneath a line of code waiting. Outside the lab, spring had slipped in quietly, sunlight pooling across the linoleum floor like a blessing no one had to earn. I didn't smile, but something in my chest softened. Erin slid into the room, holding 2 coffees, one slightly sloshed from her sprint up the stairs. Still no RSVP from the walkers? She teased gently, but her eyes checked my expression first. I shook my head. They didn't even ask this year. She handed me the coffee, then leaned against the edge of the stainless steel table. That's a first. It is. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it in the bones of the moment. It wasn't just about a skipped invitation. It was a shift, a recognition, maybe even respect in the most twisted, unspoken form. They had finally accepted that I wouldn't come crawling for a chair at their table. Instead, I built my own. Sunday came golden and brisk. A breeze tapped against the windows of Novosin, but inside the air buzzed with anticipation. It was supposed to be a quiet day, an empty campus, a skeleton crew, but we were all here voluntarily. The trial run for our latest compound was ready. Erin adjusted her goggles and grinned. You realize if this works, it'll change everything. Not just for the project, but for how biotech approaches reactive genome mapping. I nodded, already deep into the data streams. Around us, our team of young researchers, bright-eyed caffeine-fueled, hovered over monitors and centrifuges. They were my people now. Not by blood, but by belief. We worked through lunch. No one mentioned ham or chocolate eggs or who used to hide what in whose garden. The only tradition we honored was integrity. Around 2:17 p.m., it happened. The screen flickered once, then stabilized. A soft ping. Erin gasped. Look. We gathered. Every metric lined up. No anomalies, no failures, just confirmation. I didn't shout, didn't cheer. Instead, I reached for the brown leather notebook I'd started using back in January, the one that replaced the framed relic Sophie sent. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote April 9th, breakthrough confirmed. The quiet version of triumph. Erin leaned over my shoulder. That's it. That's enough, I said. We celebrated the way only scientists do. Someone ordered noodles. Someone else played indie rock from a phone speaker, and a postdoc cried tears of joy by the autoclave. Later that evening, as the sun slipped behind the edge of the city, painting the windows with a watercolor wash of gold and lavender, I sat alone at my desk. The lab had emptied. The hum of the machines had stilled. I opened my inbox out of habit. Junk mail, conference reminders. One flagged message from Forbes. I clicked. Subject, congratulations. Women of the Year. Nominee, I didn't blink. Just reread it slowly, then let the weight of it settle somewhere beneath my ribs. The headline didn't ask where I'd spent Easter. It didn't need to. You're nominated for Woman of the Year. They named rooms after donors. I named one after the girl they forgot. The sun in Colorado had a different kind of warmth in April, steadier, more deliberate. Not showy like spring back east, just earned. The glass facade of the new building caught that light and flung it back into the sky, refracting through the engraved letters that spanned the entryway. In clean, proud serif, the Elise Walker Research Hall. I stood outside a moment longer than I needed to. Not for ceremony, not even to steady my nerves. Just to feel. The stone beneath my feet, the hum of cameras setting up in the distance, the soft murmur of arriving guests. This time, they had come for me. Vanessa appeared at my side, her coat sharp, an expression warmer than I'd ever seen it. They'll want you at the mic in about 5 minutes. You good, I'm here, I said. That's enough. Inside the atrium buzzed with quiet energy. Not the frenzied chaos of ego or performance, but the kind of anticipation that only science, real science, could generate. Erin had already slipped in wrangling name tags and gently steering a few graduate students away from the dessert table. The research team, mostly women, Mostly first-generation college students stood clustered around the prototype models we'd installed earlier this week. I caught one of them snapping a selfie with the biotech rendering glowing in the background. It made me smile. At precisely 10:30, the music dimmed. The mic adjusted itself with a soft pop. A local reporter whispered to his camera crew. I stepped up, not into a spotlight, but into a steady wash of daylight pouring through the skylight above. I'll keep this short, I said, hands resting loosely on the podium. This space wasn't built to make headlines. It was built to make room. No applause, just breathless attention. That was enough. For those who wrote the code but didn't sign the patent. For those listed in acknowledgments instead of authorship. For those whose ideas lived in someone else's voice, this is yours too. A few nods. One camera flash. I didn't look toward it. This year, the Elise Walker Research Fellowship will fund 100 women pursuing synthetic biology and systems design. Priority will be given to students who come from the margins, those who've had to shout less and prove more. Erin's eyes glistened. Vanessa folded her arms with something between pride and knowing. I stepped down from the podium and walked through the corridor that now bore my name. It still felt surreal, but not unearned. The walls were fresh, but the foundation had been built years ago. One overlooked idea, one ignored submission, one silent contribution at a time. And today, every inch of it was mine. Later, after the speeches ended and the last ribbon fell, I stood in front of a glass door near the West Wing. A plaque beside it read, "For the ones not in the picture, but who held the camera." I exhaled. Someone handed me an envelope. No return address. The handwriting was careful, familiar. I waited until I was alone again before opening it. Inside, a letter from Sophie. Elise, I watched the live stream. You were everything I never said thank you for. If you ever consider building something together again, I'm ready to follow, not lead. I understand if you say no, but I needed you to know. Sophie. There were no tears, no bitterness. Just a quiet clarity, the kind that settles once a storm has passed, and nothing, no debris, no memory can shake your footing. A voice called gently from down the hall. A journalist was waiting, camera ready. I walked toward the interview chair, sat down, smoothed my blazer. The final question came softly. Was it all worth it? I looked straight into the lens and let the moment breathe. Even silence, when earned, sounds like applause. I never asked for applause. I asked to be seen. And when even that was too much, I chose to build quietly, steadily, without their permission. If you've ever been the one left out of the photo, the meeting, the memory, I hope my story reminds you that silence doesn't mean surrender. Tell me what part of this story echoes in you. I want to hear your voice, because for too long, people like us have been spoken over. Let's change that. And if you're still waiting for recognition, don't. Start building. Let your results speak first. Then step into the light.